Right. There's a lot of like what ifs right now.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's so lovely to see all of you here tonight. My name is Matthew Packwood. I'm director of the Oregon Origins Project. We are honored to have with us tonight Indigenous artists and culture bearers Wilson Wewa, Justin Quaempts, Fred Hill, Shannin Stutzman, Aiyanna Brown, and Jake DePoe. We send our best wishes to Esther Stutzman, who is recovering from surgery and can't be here tonight. Esther's granddaughter and Shannon's daughter, Aiyanna Brown, will present with Shannin instead. Thank you, Aiyanna. Before we begin, we would like to offer a land acknowledgement. The Portland metropolitan area and the entire area of the confluence of the Columbia and Willamette rivers is the traditional homeland and fishing and gathering range of tribes throughout the region. Oregon Origins Project honors the peoples who have cared for the land since time immemorial. Tribes of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Confederated Tribes and bands of the Yakama Nation, Cowlitz Indian Tribe, and many others. The Portland metropolitan area today is home to the 9th largest urban Native American population in the US, descended from at least 380 tribes across the country. Oregon Origins Project is committed to helping lift up and support the peoples whose lands these are, providing a platform for their artists and culture bearers to share their traditions and artistic work. We encourage you to join us in learning about, honoring, and supporting peoples in Oregon and beyond. Tonight's program features presentations by the artists and culture bearers, followed by a brief break at the end, then a question and answer session. And now, I'd like to introduce to you the MC for tonight, Fred Hill. Fred is a singer, drummer, and teacher, and a member of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. Please join me in welcoming Fred.
Thank you. Or in Chiquatla, or Kaitsiaya, or Jique, as we would say in Navajo, even though I'm not Navajo, I just have Navajo friends. But it's great to be here. We've anticipated this for quite some time in working with Matthew here. And so in order to get ourselves situated, to each of us to present to you, from our tamna, from our hearts. So at this time, we'd like to call up Wilson Wewa, as she's going to offer invocation, a prayer for us. And at this time, as he does, I ask you to stand. And as we do this, I'd just like to ask you to remain from any recording. And so we can just all record this in our hearts and our minds. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Wilson. I'm going to go ahead and read what has been noted here. Wilson Wewa, he's Northern Paiute Palouse, has been involved with tribal language, culture, and lifeways throughout his life. He was raised on the Warm Springs Indian Reservation in Central Oregon. As a child, he spent countless hours hearing the stories of his family, tribe, and past lifeways as they pertain to his life. Later, Wilson traveled extensively with his family, and especially his grandmother, to other parts of the Great Basin, where he met many other Northern Paiute elders that added to his knowledge of his people. Wilson works for the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs as the Senior Wellness Coordinator, a position he has held since 1980, and is consulted by other tribes and organizations in the United States on elders' issues. More recently, he was invited as a guest lecturer to the prestigious College of William and Mary in Virginia to speak on Native American issues that are related to health, spirituality, environment, treaty rights, and as they pertain to water and land. He also works at the University of Oregon and Oregon State University as a consultant on Northern Paiute history and ethnobotany. Recently, he wrote a book entitled Legends of the Northern Paiute, which was printed by Oregon State University Press and is being sold throughout Amazon. Wilson continues to be called to lecture at museums and venues around the Northwest. So now I believe we can go ahead and applaud. So let's welcome Wilson Wewa.
Yatagan kwai no pishanum ipiwuk kwai tu no pishayo umupunin na yatagan kwai I nuanania wiawiwa itaiwu nania Wilson Wewa no kojupidu ya tuviwa Warm Springs white tu. Good evening. My name is Wilson Wewa. My Indian name is Wiawiwa. I come here from Warm Springs, and I speak in the language of my father's side of the family. Because it's a sharing evening, my dad and my mom were not of the same tribe. My dad was Northern Paiute, and my mom was Palouse and Nez Perce. Two languages, two separate cultures. And so growing up, I did not know how to speak either Nez Perce language or Northern Paiute language. I was not as immersed in the culture as other people, but as time went on, things changed. And today, was said in my bio, I do a lot of work throughout the Northwest. I'm expert on Northern Paiute history, and I am recognized as a spiritual leader for the Northern Paiute people. And on occasion, if I have the time, I help to go and bury my people in the various reservations in Northern Paiute country, using the songs that were taught to me by the elders from the Northern Paiute culture. I'm also a Washat leader on the plateau, and my journey in the Washat faith began in the late 60s when I was a little boy. Many of our ceremonies in those days were relegated to older members of our community, and children were not allowed to participate or be a part of those gatherings. And even though our house was near the Longhouse, which is our ceremonial center, I would hear on Sunday the drumming and the singing and the ringing of the bell. And as a young person, I was curious to what was happening at the Longhouse. Being who I was, probably taking after both my mom and my dad, who were very outspoken individuals, one Sunday I decided I had to see what was going on at the Longhouse. And so I went up the hill to the Longhouse and went in the east door and sat down, and I watched the elders carry on the ceremony that we follow throughout the plateau, which is called the Washat religion. I did that off and on for one winter, and when they would finish the ceremony and the singing, they would get ready to eat. And every time they'd get ready to eat, I'd make my exit and walk out the door and walk back home. One Sunday, as I was getting ready to make my exit out the only door to the east, one of the ladies who was the cook blocked my escape and asked me to eat with them. That began my walk in learning the Washat faith at the age of 14. Today, I'm 66 years old, and I'm well known throughout the plateau as a leader of our Washat. There are 18 longhouses within the plateau, and I've probably led services in each one of them, because the people of the plateau are the Yakima, the Umatilla, Walla Walla, Nez Perce, Warm Springs, tribes and the many bands that go along with it, Palouse, and because of the similarity in the dialects, we all use the same songs, we all perform our ceremonies, just a little bit different from one another, but we all believe in the same supreme being that we worship with our songs, and we understand the teachings of each home, as we prefer to call it. In the times past, our people lived on the plateau, used the tule reeds from along the rivers and streams and the ponds and the lakes to make mats, and that's what they used to make their coverings for teepee structures, and also the elongated teepee structures that were along the Columbia River and its tributaries. Tule, even though many of you may think that tule is beautiful to see next to the water in the springtime when it's turning gold, is spongy inside, and it's a really good insulator for a home. And I've been, the Wanapum tribe set up teepees at the mouth of the Snake River about 15 years ago. They put a long house there made out of tule and a couple of teepee structures that were covered with the mats. And I knew they were there, and I thought maybe the village was there on that day, and I drove in there to see. The structures were up, but there was nobody there except somebody that was came out there to make sure that they weren't being vandalized. And we were talking, and they said, well, let's go inside. It's too hot out here standing. So we went inside, and there was probably a 10-degree drop in temperature when we went into the tule mat teepee. So they are very well insulated, and our people use those throughout the winter. My dad's people in the Great Basin, when I lost my grandpa, my grandma was good for a while, and pretty soon her health started to go downhill, and the family recognized it. I was still in high school in 1974, and when I graduated, my parents got me a car for my graduation present. And so all the stories that I heard as a child, listening to my grandma, I told my grandma, let's go to Duck Valley Reservation for 4th of July and see if you know any of the people you told me about. And she told me, I think all the people I knew are probably all gone now. I don't think anybody will recognize me. Well, let's go. So she said, all right. So we took off to northeast Nevada on the Nevada-Idaho border. And we got there for the 4th of July celebration that they had down there. And I had an aunt down there that ran a concession stand, and she said, take out the lawn chair, put grandma right here, and go ahead and park. So we unloaded her and sat her down there, and some elders from down there came, and they walked over and shook her hand and asked her, are you Maggie Wewa? And she said, yeah. And they start talking to her in the Paiute language, and my grandma started talking the language to them. And as people found out who she was, people started gathering to talk to her, and I was somewhat overwhelmed that many people still remembered who she was. And she lived 10 more years after that, passing away in 1988, because she got, I guess as the saying goes, a new lease on life. She enjoyed traveling with me. She enjoyed going to the powwows. She enjoyed meeting people. She enjoyed singing the songs of our people and speaking the language, because my dad, my uncle, and my aunt were the only speakers on our reservation of the Paiute language. So I had a unique opportunity to learn from my grandma and all those elders at that time about my Paiute culture. One of the things that our elders from the plateau and the Great Basin relished back in the 70s and late 60s when they would get together one-on-one or in a group or at a ceremony was they relished talking about the past. They loved talking about the wanderings of their parents, of their great-grandparents, talking about the fishing places, the hunting places, all over the plateau and the Great Basin. They talked about our material culture. They talked about basketry. They talked about songs. They talked about prayers. They talked about our beliefs. And so my education started to grow. And any time that something was puzzling to me, I sought out answers. If my grandma couldn't answer them, I went to other reservations to find the information. And so for probably 30 years of my life, I was searching for answers from both my dad's people and my mom's people. And so that began my life. When I was 14 and I went to the Longhouse, we had an elder. His name was Andrew David. His Indian name was Tutawaisha. Him and his wife were the leader of our Longhouse in Warm Springs. And he took me under his wing to teach me how to sing with the drum and how to use the bell to carry on our songs. We have 3 longhouses in Warm Springs where we carry on the ceremonies. And I studied under Andrew for a while, and then I moved to the other longhouse on the north part of our reservation at Simnasho, where we had 3 elder ladies that were fulfilling the leadership role of their longhouse. And so I started learning from them. And I drove for them to powwows, to funerals, to memorials, took them to pick huckleberries, took them to dig roots, took them to gather medicines. And all those times they were telling stories, sometimes legends, sometimes lifeways. So I learned from those elders. I learned how to cook camas roots from them. I learned how to beadwork. I learned how to tan hides. Today, a lot of those things that we did in those times, in the 70s, that way of life, even here in the city of Portland, there are things that have changed in the past 30 years and even 20 years that our children will never experience. Today, I make an effort to talk to my grandsons in the Paiute language. All of my grandchildren know that I'm a leader in the Longhouse. Sometimes they have the fortune to travel with me and to hear the stories. One of the biggest treasures to me is after I wrote the legend book, Legends of the Northern Paiute, which were legends that had never been written down before by anybody. There were some manuscripts, even here in Reed College, of Northern Paiute legends and excerpts of legends that were documented by anthropologists and ethnologists, but the full legend was never told. And as I went through my traveling with my grandparents, my grandma and my other elders, I heard the full legends. I heard the full lifeways. And so I put those down into writing. So things have changed in my lifetime. My grandma remembered the times of being out in the Oregon desert, because she was born in 1882 and she passed away in 1988. She rode horseback from Warm Springs clear to northeast Nevada to the Duck Valley Reservation. It took them a week and a half to ride that distance. It takes us 10 hours to drive in a car. 9 if I push it. But it was listening to her stories and pointing out where our people were buried, where there were ancient campsites, where there were root digging sites, where there were hunting places that our people on the Great Basin hunted. And then even more important was the legend places that she pointed out in Central Oregon. I already mentioned Smith Rock. Smith Rock is the animal village And the rocks that are prominent clear to the top of the butte are animals, lizards, mice, squirrels, badgers, bighorn sheep, because that was the animal village. On the front of my book is a picture of a pillar that's located at Smith Rock that is more prominently known as Monkey Face. I've always, I've never been very happy about that name, because when I grew up, to our family, it was Nuwuzoho. And Nuwuzoho was a giant in the days of the legends that traveled the land and carried his long stick like a spear and almost drove to extinction some of the animals, because he would stick them on his stick and then he'd put them in a rock bowl that he carried on his back. And when he had enough in there, he'd use his pestle to grind up all the animals into a mush for him to eat. And as he was looking over the ridge, and the people asked Coyote to help rid the land of Nuwuzoho, and Coyote recognized that the people were disappearing because Nuwuzoho was eating so many of the animal people at that time, that Coyote said this will never happen again, and he changed Nuwuzoho into stone as he was looking over the ridge. And he remains there today, that we can't take everything for granted, that there'll become adversities that will come up to face, but that we have to be patient, and that we have to always acknowledge the Creator in order to overcome those things. There's a place in Central Oregon called Hole in the Ground, where Coyote in his wanderings would always look, he'd crawl up onto the highest point on Newberry Crater, and he would look up at the stars, and he would wonder in the evening. He'd lay there as it got evening and wonder as he seen one star and another star and another star. What are those things up in the sky? Why do they sparkle the way they do? And so he coerced his grandmother, who was a very well-known rope maker and string maker, to make a long rope for him that he tied onto an arrow, and he shot it into the sky, and it stuck up there, and he crawled into the sky people. And as the sun went down, the people came out of their lodges at night. They built a fire, and there was many, many ladies that had long fringed dresses with abalone shells tied on the end of the fridges, and when they danced around the fire, those abalone shells would sparkle. And then in that time, Coyote wanted to stay with them because he was a kind of an amorous person, and he didn't want to leave all those pretty women in the sky. But he was sinking back through the clouds, and they told him, you can only stay here if you continue to dance. And so he'd dance throughout the night. He'd dance, and he'd get tired, he'd sit down, he'd start sinking, he'd start dancing. Finally he said, I know how I'm not going to fall back to earth. So he tied the rope around him that he had made, in hopes that if he fell to earth, he'd crawl back up into the heaven again. But he did fall back to earth, and the rope went through their fire, and it broke, and it fell to earth. And that was the first shooting star. And when the Coyote hit the ground in the Oregon desert, he made the hole in the ground. If you want to hear the full story, you got to buy the book. Malheur Cave over southeast of Burns is one of our sacred sites that we're no longer able to go to. It was where the emergence of the animal people came from out of that cave. And Coyote was greedy in that story, and he kept all the animals locked away. Or his brother, I know I have it wrong. I haven't told the story for so long. They were locked up in there, and Coyote wanted to see what was in there, and nobody would let him look because they knew if he looked in there, something bad would happen, which eventually did. He opened the gate and all the animals ran out and covered the earth. And they're there still today. And because of that emergence, that was why my people revered Malheur Cave. But today, I think the last time I was there was probably before we made the book, we took pictures, I went into there, and but today I found out that the owners of that, which are the Masons, they got special made iron grill to place over the mouth of the cave so nobody can go in there now. Those are the things that brought sadness to our old people. And that was why our old people told us to never to forget who we were, to always remember where we were from. When I was a baby, I only heard the story from my dad that when I was a baby that my grandma was holding me and she took me outside and spit on her finger and put it on the ground, and then put the mud in my mouth. And later on, she did that for my niece. And my sister didn't like that happening. But my grandma said that she did that so that we would never forget the land that we came from. That the land would always recognize that we were part of it, and that we would always come home. And when my grandsons were born, they're here this evening, I did that for them, following my grandma's tradition, because I raised my grandsons and I spit on my finger and put it in the ground and put the mud into their mouth and prayed that they would never forget their homeland and forget who they were. Because that was my grandma's way that was done for her. That when our young men would go out and hunt, or they would go out and fish, that those animals and the fish would recognize who they were because of that deed that was done to them to remember the land that they were from. Today, because of the assimilation that was taught to our people, today our women think that those traditions are gross and they won't do it for their children. And maybe that's why some of our children are becoming lost, because we don't remind them where they're from. My grandma used to say, as we come into this world, that's what she did to remind us where our home was, and that the time when it comes for us to pass away, that we would come back to the same land that we were introduced to be buried in. So, just a little bit sharing. Wow. Those guys in the corner were supposed to put up a 5-minute sign, but they didn't. I know there are other speakers. I know they have wonderful things to share. I could talk for hours. We were doing a practice this afternoon, and my brother, Tautlik, we were doing the mic test, and I says, my name is Wilson Wewa, yada, yada, yada. You guys get it? Yeah, we got it. I went and sat down. He says, boy, that's the shortest speech I ever heard Wilson say. So I thank you. We'll have time for questions later, and I hope that I've given you some food for thought. I've come to this college to do research because this is one of the oldest colleges in Oregon that has archival material that was done with people throughout the plateau, Western Oregon, and the Great Basin. And I love their collections here of archival material. So I thank you this evening for listening to me, and I hope I have opened the door for your understanding for our cultures that have never faded away, that we are feverishly trying to maintain in Indian country. Thank you.
That's an Indian 5 minutes. Our next featured presenter, I'll just go ahead and read his bio. He's a member of the Cayuse and Walla Walla tribes, Umatilla. Justin Quaempts is an Indigenous Native American self-taught mixed media artist who specializes in freehand spray paint, graffiti-style abstract art. Justin was born and raised on the Umatilla Indian Reservation in Eastern Oregon, and after a great life of journey off reservation for a few years, it's where he and his family still reside today, a major league baseball draft pick of the Texas Rangers. NCAA Division I baseball player and a graduate from Oklahoma State University. Justin currently coaches softball for Pendleton High School and gives private lessons as a hitting coach as well. Let's welcome Justin Quaempts.
Hey, good evening. Makas Katsiaga, so much gratitude and just overall humbleness for being here. Super nervous, honestly. I've been through so many things in my life, and man, like Fred was talking about, I played Division I baseball. I pitched in front of 4,000 people, and I'm probably a little bit more nervous tonight than I was then, you know. I'm a context-driven individual. So in that, I usually have to know why things are the way they are. And for me, growing up on the Umatilla Indian Reservation, we were so sports inundated with what we were doing on a daily, just everyday sports, whether it was basketball, baseball, softball, pickup, anything, we were doing it. And for those that don't know, my dad's name is Bill Quaempts, prominent basketball, baseball player from our reservation. And oftentimes growing up, I heard, your dad was the best basketball player I've ever seen play. Big shoes to fill, you know what I mean? Especially I was not the jumper he was, I was not the fast dude he was, so I had to find different ways. And baseball was kind of always a natural fit. In that effort, I always honestly would tell you I was gonna play baseball. You know, 5 years old, 10 years old, 15 years old, 20 years old, 25 years old. Literally, that's what I wanted to do. I'd convinced myself in every facet of my life that that's what I was gonna be, and that's what I was gonna become. So when I had the opportunity to go to the major leagues, or actually the minor leagues with the Rangers and the Texas Rangers and the Seattle Mariners, it was probably too good to be true, and I almost signed with them. But people don't realize Oklahoma State is a top 5 Division I baseball program of all time. They offered me a full ride, chose to do that, turned down 3 contracts, went to Oklahoma State, talking about winning a national title, blow my elbow out 2 days before we go to LA. Coming back from Tommy John, had the best surgeon in the world do my surgery. 3 months after Tommy John, blow my back out. So long story short, injuries has been a huge part of what I've done and what I've become, because as a resilient Native American person, I always thought that coming back and being tough and being strong, and especially with what I was doing in my daily life, was who I was supposed to be. So when that coach told me I was no longer going to be playing professional baseball, when my agent told me I was no longer going to be a part of his cohort, that was probably one of the worst days of my life. I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, in the airport, by myself, basically crying. Individual came up to me, and I swear to God, I thought he's like one of those serendipitous, like, are you an angel? Because he was like, you okay, brother? And like, he literally was a ex-Pittsburgh Steeler. So he told me the story when he got released, because I was breaking the context down to him what I was doing. It was surreal in the fact that I had somebody else basically experiencing the same thing. I thought I was so special in this fact, but there are so many people out there that have dreams, not only with athletics, that don't quite get to fulfill them. But to me, my Indian name is Wewa, means the traveler, and that's what I got to do. I've been able to see 44 different states. I have a master's degree from Lewis and Clark College, and I'm here today as an artist, a real artist, and I would have never believed that ever in my life, you know what I mean? So, you know, I have to break things down again, and with the artist point, I'm a self-taught artist. I had to have double back surgery 4 years ago. Couldn't walk, literally was in bed. My dad's the real artist, and Fred knows my dad. And anybody that knows him knows that he's amazing at whatever he does. I don't know if people know Quaempts, Peter Quaempts from the Umatilla Indian Reservation. That's my grandpa's brother. Pretty famous, you know, people know who he is. Amazing artist as well. So all these people in my family are just these artists. I would take art class and I couldn't do anything, you know what I mean? So baseball, sports was always everything for me. So when it wasn't, I had to find something else, right? So after my back surgeries, I'm sitting in bed, literally invalid, can't walk, can't do much. My dad gives me a few art lessons. Next thing you know, he's got some spray paint, some old canvases, some refurbished wood panels and all this. So I just start spraying because I'm so focused on my back, the pain, the injury. I had to release myself and find a different avenue to focus on. Not just minute by minute, second by second. That's how bad my back was. The recovery, the pain, the journey coming back from that, I had to find something. I would literally spray for hours, people, hours, and to the point where my hands were soaked, my feet, my pants, whatever I was. And I didn't mind. You know, I'd go out to Walmart, people would be looking at me, and I'm looking down, and I have pain all over my hands. So I just started experiencing with spray paint, and I understood that different paints, different temperatures, different angles started giving different results. So I just started spraying. Next thing you know, I kind of said, hey, that kind of looks good. I asked my family. They said, no, not bad, not bad. And then it started building, and then started building. And I said to my best friend, Micah, who's in this front row, he says, that doesn't look too bad. And then I sent it to Maria Tenorio. She said, that doesn't look too bad. And next thing you know, we're here, and I'm just like so excited. I cannot even tell you guys how amazing this opportunity really is. With COVID, it provided such a blanket of, I don't want to say denial, but I was ready for the world to see my work. I was ready. 2019, I was ready. COVID hits. I had an art show in Pendleton last year, and it just wasn't, there wasn't very many people there. I didn't sell one piece, and I was pretty bummed, honestly. And then next thing you know, I get an email from Matthew, who, by the way, Matthew, man, this guy is amazing. Just give him a round of applause. I am serious, guys. You know, Matthew Packard is amazing, Molly Gardner, they've just helped us so much just to get here. And it's been over a year, and I thought it was like 8 months. I asked Matthew today, when did we first start talking? About a year ago. I said, wow, you know, so. My art is more abstract, and like I said, spray paint artist, so growing up next to the train tracks, I always could see these cars and going by, and spray painting has a stigma with it. And it's often negative, it's often like looked down upon, but through those, like just watching some of the trains go by over the years in my life, I would see some of the most beautiful artwork I'd ever seen. So in the fact that I couldn't draw or do really anything in the traditional art class, I started coming up with things like this. And to me, I could sit here and break down my life story, but I think this is really the best way I can communicate. I'm a poet, I'm a writer, I'm a former politician. You know, I've served for state commissions, met Governor Brown, you know, Kitzhaber, all those individuals. And without the back injury and me resigning from the Board of Trustees for my tribe, I probably could be in Salem right now. You know, that's real. But I'm here today, and I always say I could never be more blessed to be where I'm at than right here, right now. Currently, I'm a softball coach. I coach softball for Pendleton High School. We won a state title last year. I'm also, yay, thanks. And I currently coach for an 18U travel team that got second in the nation at the Triple Crown Gold tournament in Reno. And my daughter, she would be here, but she has homecoming. She's a freshman at Pendleton High School. And she actually plays on the 18U team as a 14-year-old and is doing extremely well. And herself is now a Division I recruit already as a freshman. So just life comes full circle, and I could sit here, like I said, and talk about all the things that have gotten me here, but I just am so blessed to be here after the back surgeries. I've had 9 surgeries, guys, playing sports. 9. 2 back surgeries, 2 elbow surgeries, a wrist surgery, 2 knee surgeries, and a stomach. So to understand the resiliency that it takes to come back from major surgeries, I just related often to the stories that we hear about from the natives and the individuals that came before us that had to go through so much to be here. So I just want to say thank you so much. More importantly, I just want eyes and individuals to see what I have to say through my artwork. And I just appreciate each and every one of you for being here. The energy is amazing. I feel super blessed, and I just want to say thank each and every one of you.
Just had to have a little counsel with Matt there for a moment. Thank you, Justin. It's great to hear your story. Come clear to Portland to hear your story.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah. I was wondering who was driving in that real nice yellow truck. Yeah, so come clear to Portland to find out what kind of a ride you ride in. But yeah, Justin, like I said, I went to school with his dad, Bill Quaempts, and out of a little town of Pilot Rock. But I want to go ahead and not flip the script, but just go ahead, even though that I'm on next, but I want to go ahead and give place here to the mother and daughter here, Shannin Stutzman, and her daughter, Aiyanna Brown, and they're members of the Comema Kalapuya Hanas Kus. And Shannin was raised in the traditions of her ancestors, the Comema Kalapuya and Hanas Kus. Stutzman has a lifetime of experience in education and traditional youth summer camp administration. Shannin serves as the cultural director for the Native American Youth Camp and has given presentations on Kalapuya history, singing, drumming, and storytelling in schools, universities, and libraries for over 20 years. And she is deeply involved in the Kalapuya language project, serving as curriculum writer and researcher. So let's welcome Shannin and Aiyanna.
Shannin Stutzman, Tanketsi du Esther Stutzman, Sum Komama Kalapuya, now Hannes Kus. Hi, my name is Aiyanna Brown. I am the daughter of Shannin Stutzman and the granddaughter of Esther Stutzman. I am Komama Kalapuya and Hannes Kus, and we are storytellers, songkeepers, and we are currently working on revitalizing our native language, the Kalapuya language. So we're going to share a little bit of that with you guys, but we're going to start out with a song. The Quaempts side of my family is from what is common-day Willamette Valley, which is anywhere from south of Roseburg to what is now northern Salem area. The Kalapuya people were once over 15,000 strong, and after settlement and a lot of assimilation at one point, there were less than 2,000 Kalapuya people. Our main language, the Kalapuya language, was split up into 3 different dialects, the north, the middle, and the south, which was Saniam, Tualatin, and then the Kalapuya, or the Quaempts. Our family is from the southernmost, so the Yonkala, or the Quaempts Kalapuya. And our specific family was fortunate enough to stay on our homeland. A lot of the Kalapuya people were sent either to Grand Ronde or to Silet's reservations. Along with many other families and different people, we lost a lot of our culture, we lost a lot of our ways. We are still currently working on revitalizing our language. There are less than a couple dozen people in the entire world who are learning the Kalapuya language. There are currently no L1 speakers, so there are no fluent speakers of the Kalapuya language. We recently were in contact with a linguist, Paul McCartney, not big Paul McCartney, but our Paul McCartney, and unfortunately he has passed, but he was able to help us put together a dictionary of the Kalapuya language, which has helped us leaps and bounds to be able to recover what we thought at one point was a dead language. So like I said a little bit earlier, on top of that, we are traditional storytellers. I learned from probably the day I was born, hearing my grandmother's stories, and I'm sure my mom has too, from my grandma and our aunties and everyone like that. So oral tradition and oral history is a big part of our family and our culture. My mom is a drum keeper and a song keeper, so that's another thing that I've had the opportunity to learn as well. I find it very important as a young person, especially in modern days. We were talking earlier about how the world's moving so fast nowadays. So I find it really special to be able to connect this new, crazy, fast-moving modern-day world to this, older traditional culture that I have an amazing opportunity to be a part of and to learn. So it's a little bit about me, and so I'll invite Mom over to do some stories. Oh, or do you want me to do one?
You want to tell a story first?
Sure. Okay, sorry. So, like I was saying, a lot of our traditions are passed down through oral history. Not a lot of our stories, our songs are written down. I remember being a young child and sitting around the campfire at camp, or sitting around the living room and listening to my mom and my aunties and my grandmother tell stories. And one of my favorite parts that I remembered about my grandmother telling stories is how active and how lively she was, and how intrigued I was in these stories, even if I had heard them tens and hundreds or thousands of times. So I'm going to share with you guys one of my favorite stories, but I'm going to need a little bit of participation from the group. So can everyone make the sound of a snake? Okay, that sounds like a Portland snake. Great, by the way. But the Kalapuya snake, it goes a little bit like this. So the story I'm going to tell you is about snake, and when I lift my hands up, I would like you guys to help me to make the Kalapuya snake sound. So we'll go. Perfect. So long ago, as I was told that the people and animals walked amongst each other, there was this very, very tall, handsome person, and his name was Snake. He was so tall, and he thought he was so handsome and great. He had scales growing all the way up the back of his head, but that's because the old lady said that he didn't wash behind his ears good enough. That's what my grandma always said anyways. But Snake was so tall and so handsome, and he thought that he was so smart. And because he was so smart, he soon thought that he could tell others what to do. So one day he was walking around being his tall, handsome, smart self, and he came across this little girl digging camas, and he looked and he said, "Little girl, that's not how you dig camas. Do it this way." And the little girl did, and Snake looked and he went, because he knew he was right. Well, this made Snake happy. He had helped this little girl and shown her how to do this correctly. So with this newfound confidence, he was walking around, and sure enough, he comes across this little boy, and this little boy was skinning a hide. And he looks at this little boy and he said, "That's not right. Here, do it my way." And sure enough, the little boy did, and Snake looked at it up and down, and he said, because he knew that he was right. Now after this, Snake thought, well, these humans, they're not doing anything correctly. So eventually he found this human village, and he walked in and looked around, and he just shook his head. Sure enough, everyone was doing something wrong. So he decided to move into that village. Sure enough, the very next day, he came out of his lodge and he walked around and he started telling people what to do. He told this lady how to cook dinner. He told a gentleman over here how he should stretch his bow. And sure enough, eventually, of course, all the humans got tired of this. One day they got together and they said, "What are we going to do? Snake is so bossy. He's coming around and he's telling us what to do. We want our ways back." And so eventually they came up with a plan. So one night while Snake was sleeping, all the men came up into Snake's lodge and they tied him up. And Snake woke up and he looked himself up and down and he said, "That's not how you tie someone up. Do it my way." And the men, well, they decided to listen. So they took the ropes off and Snake said, "When you're gonna tie someone up, tie their feet together and tie them so tight that they can't even wiggle their toes." He said, "Now take their arms and put them right next to their body. Wrap them so tight all the way up to their chin that they can't even wiggle their fingers." And so the villagers did, and sure enough, when they were done, Snake looked himself up and down and he said, because he knew that he was right. So the men tipped him on his side and they said, "Snake, we are tired of you telling people what to do. You cannot do this anymore, and because of this, we are taking you far away from the village." Now all the men tried to get behind Snake and lift him up, but he was so long and tall that he was just too heavy. They couldn't. So they came up with an idea. They all lined up behind Snake and they started rolling him. And they rolled him right out of that village that night. Rolled him all through the night, through the next village, and they just kept rolling and rolling. Soon they came up on a hill and they rolled him, but he was so heavy he just flattened that hill right out. That's why the Willamette Valley is so flat, they say. They just kept rolling and he kind of started to get skinnier and longer, and they just kept rolling him, and he got thinner and longer, and they rolled him, and thinner and longer, and soon his arms started to form into his body, and they rolled him, and his legs started forming together, and they rolled him, and eventually he wriggled right out of those ropes, and they never saw him again. And that is the story of Snake. But if you ever see a Kalakuyu snake, and you come up to him, you might hear him say, because he remembers the time that he was right.
I should have just stayed sitting down. She could have done the whole thing without me. You know, everyone has a snake in their family, and it's my dad in my family. He'll come in the kitchen and try to boss us around. We just go, and he leaves. But you know, growing up was like the stories always taught us a moral or a lesson, and it always also taught us something about creation. So don't be bossy, don't be like Snake, you know, stuff like that. Why is the Willamette Valley so flat? You know, things like that. Why does Snake look like he does? So that's growing up, that was my classroom, and I thought that's what how everyone else learned. Everybody sat down at the feet of their elders and learned these stories about, and we didn't know we were learning anything. We just thought we had to sit there with our hands like this and not touch our sisters and pay attention, don't stand up, don't lay down, don't do this, because you could be hunchback. You could never grow as tall as you're supposed to. Lots of different reasons why you should sit there quietly and listen to the story. And it was discipline, but I was just, okay, sounds good to me, you know. We'll go ahead and do another song, and then I just want to do a quick little expert about the dictionaries. We did bring a few copies of them. If anyone's interested, you could talk to us later about that. Just to give you guys a little idea about that. So in our language, the word kapai is hello, and we greet people with open hands to show we don't have any weapons. But it's also kind of like aloha. It also means goodbye. So we would like to say kapai to you guys, and we hope you have a good evening. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. It was great. Yeah. Yeah. My name is Fred Hill. My Indian name is Tautelik. I actually have two Indian names. My Nez side is Kautelix. But I actually used to think my name was Ilkwas Winpatak, like a full name. Here that just means, go get wood. But anyway, I'm just honored to be here and want to introduce my wife, Janice. Been married 29 years. Is that right? 29 years? Just trying to make sure I get that number right. But a member of the Umatilla tribe. I was born and raised in Pendleton, Oregon, and actually south of Pendleton in a little creek there called Mackay Creek. And I went to school in Pilot Rock, and I had lost my parents when I was an infant, so I never got to know mom or dad. So raised by grandma and an uncle and aunties and older cousins. And I'm very glad that was raised, and also an aunt that took care of me after, after a while, a few years, down in Warm Springs. She was married to a Warm Springs tribal member. And there's a religion, faith called the Shaker religion, and some of you may have heard of that. And my aunt was a very devout Shaker along with her husband at that time. And so at that young age, had that influence of going to Shaker church, ringing, 2 sets of bells. And, also going to, the Full Gospel Pentecostal church. And I remember when I used to go to those churches, especially that Full Gospel church, I never knew there was some black people there. And, and they were really, apparently they were being touched by the Spirit at the time, and I had no clue what that was about. But we got back to where we stayed, and I said, Auntie, how come those people talk like ducks? They're not talking like ducks. They were just moved that way, to speak that way. But eventually, as I went back home to Umatilla with my grandmother, at that time my aunt was trying to teach me how to do the ABCs, and had no clue anything about that. So I never was, sent to kindergarten or preschool or anything like that. But, my early life around my grandmother was where a lot of my Indian language that I speak today had taken root in my heart. I'm always talking about my grandmother because my grandmother was born in 1883 and she passed in 1985, 102. And she never spoke any English. And so a lot of her stories that she talked about, everything was with horses and even with wagons. Everything, they did actually live off the land. Even though she was originally from Yakima, but she married early, and I think my sister had said that our grandmother was probably maybe an Indian way of marriage where they were arranged marriage. And I'm not sure if that's actually how it went, but anyway, she had, several children, and my mother was the youngest. But her Indian name was Kunanmai. Kunanmai, and then the way it used to be written in her checks that she would get looked like it said Tulaletser. But when I look at that with my uncle, and he said, what does that name mean? He goes, oh, the white man don't know how to write Indian names. So, but anyway, I learned that her Indian name actually was Tulalitsa, once we figured it out. But my uncle, Charlie Mackay, he was the oldest sibling of my grandmother and my grandpa, Billy Mackay. He really pressed the issue to learn English. So, before internet times, he was a subscriber to the encyclopedias and Reader's Digest. And so it wasn't about learning the language, it was about learning English. And because, what had happened to him in his life as a young boy growing up on the Umatilla Reservation, that they had gone to the St. Andrew's Catholic school where they would get punished if they spoke their Indian language. And so, but they retained it. He retained it. And my grandmother was never, ever sent to any school. So she had lived her life, taking care of her children, and also she was a weaver, wapatla. She was a hide tanner, and she just knew how to survive. And so a lot of my, life that I talk, as I teach, young people the Indian language, I'm always, making reference to Katla, to grandma. But you know what? It was kind of crazy because having been raised with her, I never did ever call her by her English name or her Indian name, and all I ever called her was ha-ah. Ha-ah. And she'd answer. But today, over the course of my life, I have 3 grown children, and one's living in Umatilla, and then 2 living over in Yakima. And anyway, I'm very proud of my, especially my youngest daughter, because she's a U.S. Army veteran. And she did, her tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, and made it home. And then my son, my junior, he's, of course, he's a Blazer fan. He keeps me abreast of all the Blazer games and all that. But one of the ways of being raised out in the creek, out in Mackay, and my uncle was a musician also. He played, I think, the trumpet or the saxophone in his time, but we also had a piano in our home. And so we were always, listening to somebody that could play piano. But he also had a big bass drum that he took that plastic off there, and then he also put a deer hide on there and gave it a good Indian sound. And he painted on there. And I think he copied your Uncle Pete's paintings, or your Grandpa Pete. I think he copied his paintings out of a book one time. But yeah, I like that. So every now and then, Uncle Charlie would set up the drum with his nephews, Jay Minthorn, Malcolm Minthorn, and an in-law man, Curtis Thompson. He was a son of Henry Thompson of Slilo. They would set that drum up, and we'd get excited because we could hear that drum rumble in the other room, and while they were drumming, and then we'd start dancing in the other room, when you could hear that drum going, they'd start singing. Well, it kind of started out real slow, they'd just kind of just start real slow, and then they'd get into it. And then eventually, they invited me to sit at that drum with them. And so as I was on that drum, the main thing was to just stay in time, drum in time. And then they would, give me hand signals when they hit the drum hard. So I got to, do that. And the biggest time of my life came over in White Swan, Washington during the celebration over there, there was this big drum, all these men, and Curtis Thompson was sitting there, and he called me over there. He didn't call me by Fred, he just called me by Hall. Come here, Hall. So I'd go and sit down, and I sat with him. And during that drum that was going, a song was going, and then pretty soon that Curtis, he motioned to that main singer, the lead singer, and he went like that, like this little boy can lead. And pretty soon they gave me that lead, and I took that lead, right to the T of the how it's supposed to be sung. And they liked it, so they gave me another lead. And I went with that lead, and and boy, that was my big moment right there, as what I always felt was my initiation as a drummer on a big drum. And then it wasn't, till years later that I started getting acquainted with other ways of singing. My aunt, she eventually became a stick game player. I learned to sing those songs. Then eventually later on, when the Washit religion was brought back to the Umatilla Reservation, because it had been dormant for years, and then all of a sudden there was one of our elders had brought it back, out in the open, and it was met with some resistance, because of a lot of our people had been Christianized. They didn't want the old way. But today, I don't know how many years since the 70s is when we started, bringing the longhouse songs back in, and we have a longhouse. And but anyway, I've been a powwow singer most of my life, but I made this drum, and it wasn't a roadkill. I actually shot this, used a box of shells, but I did get it. I had a friend make the frame for me, and so anyway, over the years, in meeting different powwow singers, there was a drum group, you may have heard of them, called Northern Cree. And these Cree brothers came to a powwow over in Ellensburg, Washington. And they were singing their language songs. And I was listening to their songs at the recording, and I says, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be saying here, but they told me, just don't worry about what you're saying, just learn the words to copy how we say our language. And my mother-in-law, Janice's mom, she goes, Tunpanawa, Kwana Aiwa Taikashpa. What are they saying in that song? Chao Shashakosha. Chisimpa wa nash nam quick nam tam sinwita chanachi wa taikash. They just said, just sing the song straight the way that follow the words. So my mother-in-law, she says, Spaish, I kush imkinam anitstachna, well taikash nami sinwitki. Maybe you should make songs too, in our own language. And I thought about it, and I says, yeah, maybe I could. Maybe I could. And so I had made a series of songs. All of a sudden I felt inspired. And so if I can get my water there, Wilson. One time he listened to me. But everything today as an older man, when I talk to our people, and just like how our elders talked, everything was about our children. It's for our children. So I made this song. We're always to teach our children our Indian ways. Just see, taminwa na subsequent nami mianash makupa shukwats da nami tananawit. We're to always teach children our Indian ways. So I'll go ahead and sing this song. Wrong song. You know, music, I believe, is a great way to be able to, share the language. But you know, the true language is really in, like the song that we opened with tonight, and that that Wilson was able to, and those are the ones that have the the true meaning. Excuse me, of who we are as people and who we're directed by. To always look to our Creator. But in this way of myself being able to sing, I met a couple from Norway. Was introduced to them. They came to Wallowa, Oregon, and their names is Martine and Nils Kraft. And somehow, when they went home after they first came to Wallowa, they needed to return. And so she plays what's called a hardanger fiddle, and he plays acoustic guitar. In order for them to return again, we had to write a letter to the embassy over there, so in their return that we would collaborate musically. And when I listen to their music, their what is it? Their Norwegian music. This is I don't think I can blend with that. But I had my music that I sent to them, and Martine, she was able to use her fiddle as an extension of her voice to blend with my songs. We didn't actually do a actual recording, but we appeared, at the Fairy Worlds over in Seattle, performance there, and so it was something that was great. And today I teach our Umatilla language to high school students. And it's really a challenge all the time. And my wife and I were both fluent in our language, and we're just a few. And but also in where I grew up in Mackay Creek, being raised by my elder uncle, and one of the things that Wilson was talking about, the first kill ceremony. And, back when we were kids, I remember the ones that were popular of the day, the bands, was the Beatles. You know, some of you guys are old enough to remember when the Beatles first came out, right, in the 60s. And when they used to peg their pants real tight, or that's just what today they're called skinny jeans. And then the hair was combed down and across, and they had the Beatle boots. I wanted all that to be in style. So I had my sister peg my pants for me, and she turned them inside out and sewed them. And my God, it was a struggle to get into those pants. I barely got my bird legs in those pants. And anyway, it was at nighttime, and I fell asleep. I was trying to, it was time to go to bed, and I couldn't get those pants off. So they were stuck at my knees, and that's how I fell asleep. Of all times, the next morning, my uncle comes to my foot of my bed, and he's yelling at me, "Get up! I want you to get out here. There's some deer outside I want you to shoot." Huh? Get up! Get out here! Geez, I jumped up and I, saying, "Oh, can't pull them up, can't pull them down. They're stuck." And he's insistent for me to get out there. "Hurry up! Get out here!" So there I am, walking out there. He doesn't even know that my pants are like that. He's busy putting bullets in the rifle. And so, anyway, here, Justin, you hold this for me. I got to tell my story with my whole body here. So anyway, he's walking along, and he's looking up on a hillside, and there's those deer, they're standing up there, and meanwhile, here I am. And he puts the rifle on a fence post, and he goes, "Okay, go ahead and shoot. See him? Yeah, go ahead and shoot." Boy, I shot. Oh, pretty soon I missed. And he goes, "Shoot again." Oh, missed again. 3 shots. "Shoot again." Oh, I missed. He's standing there, and he looks at the gun, but at the same time he looks at me, and he sees my pants down by my knees, and gee, did this gun kick that hard? But if I would have got my deer like that, if I would have got my first deer like that, the custom is you have to tell how you got your first deer. Yeah, how'd you get your first deer, Fred? Well, let me pull my pants down here. But anyway, I dearly, miss my uncle, and I'm glad that, I was raised by him because, like I said, he was instrumental when I was in Chamao Indian School. And then he started teaching me language by learning how to use the English language, how to write our language. And so he would write to me letters, Mishnamwa, Mishnichnam, Skulisha. And then so he would just give me a couple of questions. So then I would return, what he said. "I'm doing good in school." "Yes, I'm doing good in school." Then I'd send him that letter back or whatever. And then he would send me another envelope and go, another language lesson. Here it'd be maybe like a $15 money order. A little bit of incentive for me to, learn my language. And so today, with the language program that we have in Umatilla Reservation, I've been very involved in, through the COVID, we've had to go through Zoom classes, and so it's really an ongoing effort, to be able to teach our language. And when we talk, and this coming December, I'll be back here in Portland again for the Pacific Lamprey Summit, I believe. And so they were wanting to ask me, I guess maybe possibly present and what is my, knowledge of the casuyas. The casuyas is the eel, and like I was talking about my aunt earlier, she was married to the Warm Springs man, and there in our river, the Umatilla River, is the 3 Mile Dam, and they used to stop in there. And I remember we used to go to Shears Bridge, and used to see my aunt's son-in-law, cool guy. He used to hook him out and throw him over. And my wife even has stories of her father and them, how that, when they were young, the dad would be over there, down there throwing eels over the bank, and they had to grab them and put them in a gunny sack. Anybody ever ate eels here? You guys ever eat eels? Yeah, it's good stuff, huh? But I guess one time one got stuck on her brother's forehead, couldn't pull it off. But yeah, but today a lot of our young people are learning, how to fillet them, to spread them out, and on the skewers. And your dad, he was talking, and he was saying an Indian word. We was at a meeting in Woody, Padua at the time, and he kept saying this word, and he kept saying soyakas. And we were looking at each other and goes, is he trying to say casuyas? And here, actually, that's an actual word, soyakas, and that's where they're spread out on the skewer when they're laid out. And so, he knew that word and we didn't. But anyway, thank you, and thank you again, Matt, for this opportunity. And so at this time, let me see the paper here so I can properly introduce our next featured speaker here, presenter. Thank you. And I'll allow him to say how he would properly introduce himself within his tribe. Jake A. DePoe is an enrolled member of the Confederated Tribes of the Slits Indians of Oregon and a direct descendant of the rogue Tutani Dini village of, I can't say that word, at the mouth of the river into the Pacific Ocean. He's an artist, writer, and community advocate for Indigenous queer neurodivergent issues, as well a board member of the Northwest American Indian Coalition, Jake's mission in the Indigenous creative world in the greater Native West Americas to bring light and visibility to the beautiful, artistic, creative, regionally massive, and wholly unique culture of their peoples, the Dene Hucha. Let's welcome Jake.
Good evening. There goes my feather. My name's Jake DePoe, and as Fred said, I'm the direct descendant of Gisa Charlie DePoe, who is also married to my great-great-great-grandfather, Minnie Minerva DePoe. And I mention her because so often our women get glossed over in the history of things when we have so many of these matriarchal cultures of ours that stand equal or greater in terms of the greater things of our traditions in the village. Tonight I've got some art that's going to be on the screen, and I'm also going to do a little reading out of a novel that I've written. I've entitled People by the River, People of the Ocean, People of the Sea. And that word that Fred was trying to pronounce, it's spelt all kinds of funny ways, and that's in our language, Wewa, or Nuweya, which means our words, literally our words. That word he was saying is Chematuni, that's my village. That's where we come from, where all the depots stem from. And that's at the mouth of the Rogue River on the north side. And we call ourselves the Yashua people. Yashua Tututni Dene. And Gisa Charlie DePoe is the last traditional man in our family, born of the traditions of our village before removal. My grandfather is Charles Robert DePoe. My great-grandfather is Robert Charles DePoe, and then his dad is Charles DePoe. And my nephew is Robert Charles DePoe, and my brother is Jeremy Charles DePoe. So we're proud of our name and we're proud of our history. I'm especially proud to be here tonight. I'm incredibly humbled to stand here, especially amongst this dais of amazing artists and presenters and speakers who have got so much more depth of knowledge than I can carry right now. I feel like a baby amongst my elders again. It's a good feeling, actually, because it's something I miss dearly, is feeling that sense of awe and that sense of wonder when I listen to stories, like the story of Snake that Shannin and Aiyanna were telling. I love the stories of serpents and snake. I don't know why, it always catches my fascination, and I love this feeling of just being amongst storytellers, especially. We were saying we can go till midnight. I don't know if anybody here is going to go till midnight, but we might, In any case, this is my art here. This is, I call her my big lady. It's a 4-foot painting, but this is essentially just house ladders. Do you see these zigzags here? We have a thing called the sacred zigzag, but it's meant to show you the house ladder into our plank house that we lived in, our plank house villages. And in all of our plank house villages, all the plank houses, we have a pit. They're also called pit houses. And that house ladder leads you down into there. And so that house ladder brings you into the pit, and it takes you out of the pit, into the home and out of the home. And so there's a lot of significance to that, but I'm not going to get too deep into that. I'm going to get into my excerpt here on my book. Getting back to the title of my book, I just want to get back to that, People by the River, People out of the Sea. I'm a Tututni Dene person. Tututni also translates into people by the river, and now my people were people by the sea as well, where the ocean enters the river, where the river enters the ocean is also another translation for my village, Chamatuni, there on the north side of the Rogue River at the mouth. It also translates to shoot the hole, shoot the gap, which describes the narrowness of the bay. And so there's sort of like a navigational instruction in the name too, and that's the beauty of our language way up, is there's all this depth to meaning in just like one word, And then other times, something really simple in the English will be like really long. And don't ask me to give you an example because I'm not a fluent speaker, but I hope to get there someday. So I'm going to read this excerpt here. And this excerpt has a lot to do with spirituality and a certain kind of dreamer spirituality that comes from my family, and especially in my line. I'm proud to say that my great-great-great-grandma, Minnie Minerva DePoe, oh, there's the village. Let's Chen Dun Dun, the Boiling Stone place. And I can't, as an artist, as an indigenous artist, one of the things that I try to do is I try to reflect the culture in the art. It's not my art, I'm just reflecting my culture. I'm just like a little mirror, and I want you to see what's out there, It's not really coming out of my mind. I believe in my spirituality, which is renewal spirituality. We have renewal twice a year, ceremony twice a year, which has been really hard, as we talked about with COVID. We can't come together in the way that we like to and that we're used to, but things are changing, and we're learning to work with it. Okay, so I said I was going to read my excerpt. Now I'm actually going to read it. Okay, so about 2 pages. Okay. On the big river. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. On the big river, where the salt begins to mix with the fresh water, the old man sat at the end of the canoe, steering it with his paddle through the downstream current. A young man rested laying down inside, wrapped in a cedar shawl and elk hide. The old man nudged the young man. Here, keep eating. We're almost home. Wouldn't look good if you showed up starving. The old man handed him a dried berry cake and a smoked eel. The young man ate it promptly, savoring the delicious combination of sweet berry cake with the fatty, savory smoked eel. It's kind of convenient. We're just talking about eel. He had life inside him again. He spoke. I thought I was dead. I came back to the village. The old man cut him off. He said, "Don't speak of it. Leave evil dreams with the bad spirit that gave it to you. But you did die, and we have brought you back now to be home again." The young man's eyes began to well up with tears, but he quickly wiped them away, and he ate the rest of his good food. Soon enough, he felt and heard the familiar sound of the sand underneath the canoe as the old man beached it on the shore of his village. The two of them brought the canoe up high on the sand and turned it over and walked gently home. The village all paused as the young man passed by. They did not know what had happened, and before the two men had returned, the village had begun to think that they had both died. Now here these two powerful men strode on gentle footsteps, unassuming but filled with the power of the Great Spirit on the mountain. As they approached the sweat home, the young man paused, and I should pause here as well. The sweat home is the home of the men in the village, and the women live in the other plank home. The sweat home is a long lodge, so this is the men's home that he's entering into. The young man paused. He felt the fear of being turned away creep into his heart again from his dream. The young man threw off his cedar shawl and elk hide. Naked as a new child, he strode to the stone-lined trench that makes the entrance to the sweat home. He let out a yell that resounded in all the directions of this, our Creator's gift. The village lit up immediately with yells and lele's. The entire village shuddered as well at the miraculous life and power that had returned to them. They all wondered excitedly, what will now come of this? The young man smiled broadly, the old man as well. And then the plank door to the sweat home opened up, and a young face popped out to ask, "Where have you been, brother? I've had to do all your chores while you were gone." The hand of an older man yanked the teen face back inside, and he stepped out of the sweat home with tears in his own eyes, and he said, "My son, my son, my son." The young man's father embraced him with every fiber of his body, and he cried deeply on his shoulder. Soon he stepped back. He held his son with his outstretched arms and looked upon him. "Son, you are a new man now. I can see that on you. From here on, we're going to call you Dear Dreamer." And they smiled together. And then the old man, who was the father's father, began to sing. From inside the sweat home, a great chorus of male voices joined in. She up! The three men felt a power flow from the song, from each of their hearts into one another, and they slipped each into the sweat home and placed the plank door back on behind them. Soon after, the sweat home was pouring out steam and smoke, and the sound of stomping to the beat of the redwood drum and singing could be heard throughout the village. In the house of the mother, the women of the village gathered together, a feast to celebrate the new life and power returned to them. Mussels, barnacle, lots of snails. My son loves them with wild boiled celery. Another of the ladies brought in a basket of fresh salmon berries, another a basket of acorn mush, another a basket of fresh spring water. Outside the home of the mother, a long fire pit was being prepared with many salmon roasting sticks, while another of the younger ladies carefully placed the grease pots below them each. "We'll have so much good grease," she remarked happily. The entire village was busy with happy chores, and they each felt the power the two men had brought down from the mountain. Wonder filled their hearts, and good smells of roasting fish and elk and boiling mush and shellfish wafted throughout the village. A man emerged from the sweat home, and he walked to the mother's home to send a message. Dear Dreamer can no longer eat the meat of deer, not tonight. The elder speaks of this. The dreamer agrees. The women simply nodded their understanding. More deer for me, a young lady excitedly said, after the messenger had left. Shh, we'll save it for tomorrow, said her auntie, with a sly smile in reply. As the sun began to set over a glittering golden sea, the men of the Sweat home all began to step out for the feast. They each talked with eager anticipation amongst themselves of the food, of the new power, of the new life in the village. What could now come of this? Nobody could know for certain. But in each of their hearts, they could feel a peace had come back, stronger than ever. And in that way, the village lives on forever. So, I like that one. That's mine, but anyway. The village living on forever, that's been like a theme in my spirituality, my personal walk as a renewal person, as a renewal person of my village. That idea that the village will always live on forever, and what new powers we bring down from the hills into our village. And here now, you know, I've just now met everybody here who's also presented tonight. We've met on Zoom conference, but because of COVID protocol, this is the first time I've met everybody in person except for Matthew. We had a couple of interactions before. I can feel the power in the room standing here. I can feel the power in their words and the power of their songs and the power of their stories. And it's not necessarily one thing that everybody does that has so much power. It's the village that has the power. When we come together as an indigenous people with our stories, with our spirituality especially, that's when that real power begins to flow. And as far as my own village, which is a very small village, our power and our spirituality comes from the land. And Fred and Wilson both touched on this, but the culture, the language, the songs, the regalia, all the beautiful things, everything that you see in here that you regard as native, indigenous culture is really a reflection of the land. It's a reflection of the water and all the life and all the growing things inside of it. What we call the salmon people, and we have star people, other villages, wild tribes out. It is the land that dictates who we are, because it is our Creator that made the land and therefore made us of the land. And before, now in our oral tradition, I'll tell you the story of when Quaempts, who's the giver, creator, before he went up to the sky world, Quaempts spent time at Mount Shasta imparting his laws and imparting his wisdom to the elders of our people. And this is after he'd subdued the headman of the underworld in what is now known as Crater Lake, formerly Mount Mazama. Interestingly, Coyote is also a part of that story, but I don't know if we got the time, unless we want to go till midnight. But anyway, just to sum it all up, we are a beautiful, vibrant culture, and our power is dictated by the land. And the land's not going anywhere. You know, we may change things on the surface, wreck archaeological sites, ruin environment, but the power that's been imbued in that land that we steward as indigenous people and that we hope to spread that stewardship out into the land comes from these places, the sacred places up in the hills, sacred places of the water, all of our sacred places. And so I hope for my bit here, here's my feather again, he's traveling. What do you think there, Justin? For my bit here, I just want to say that I lost my train of thought there, and then I looked up at that painting. Yeah. For my bit here, I just want you to leave tonight knowing that we are literally made of this land. You know, there's a lot of things we say, belief and faith and things like this, but I don't hold to those sort of Western ideals, you know, I gotta decolonize those words. I really believe that I was created of this land, and so do many, many, many people of our cultures, especially here in Oregon. I just want to impart on you all my thanks, Shu'a Shanula. I also want to say thank you to Matthew. You have worked exceptionally hard organizing all of us here together tonight, and to get there and to put this together. I think there's a lot of value in what we've done. I certainly feel blessed, blessing tonight to be here and to speak and to share with all of you, and to see your eyes looking back and your ears hearing. And I hope that you go and you dream powerful dreams tonight, and you dream powerful dreams for the rest of your lives. And when you do dream those powerful dreams, remember that those are things that are sent from above. You know, you're on native land, right? We say that. You know, we had the land acknowledgement at the beginning, but what does that really mean? You know, that means that you're on a sacred area, and that you are a part of this world, you are a part of this life that we are made of here. You know, to get back to Quaempts at Mount Shasta, since I'm sure you're just dying to hear that story. When he imparted those laws and those rules to our elders before he ascended to the sky world, boy, I can go on some tangents. His last law that he imparted to us, the Dene, which spread out to the whole of our culture, or whole of our renewal culture, was that you are to live and you're to die and be buried in the land of your creation. And that little simple law, you know, that's our entire lives. But it means that we're made of this land, we live on this land, we're empowered by this land, and we will die on this land and forever be a part of it. So I say, Hucha, Hucha, Hunahachatle. Blessings there as you go. Shu'a Shanula.
Please give another round of applause for our remarkable Indigenous artists and culture bearers. Wilson, Justin, Fred, Shannin, Aiyanna, Jake, thank you so much for being here tonight. So it's been a long night, but we will have a Q&A if any of you want to come back. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll have the Q&A. So thank you so much for coming.
I gotta see you at some point so we can talk.
Something that happens with our music and art even today is that the dominant culture always has to put a name on something. There was a time back in our reservation when I was learning our social dances, which we were having a little discussion over here. There was a time that they would ask me to sing our social dance songs with a hand drum. I didn't have to say what it was. I just got up and start singing the song, and the elders or the older, the parents or their kids would get up and they'd line up and they would dance because they knew what the dance was. They knew the song. Today, because of the education system, today I have to say we're going to do the butterfly dance. Ladies, get ready for the butterfly dance. This is going to be a rabbit dance. This is going to be owl dance. This is going to be eel dance. That's the only way our kids, they have lost that thought process of recognition of our culture by practicing it and living it. But I think that people like Ella Clark and Safer and Curtis and numerous other ethnologists that came to the tribes. That's what happened with my book. none of my stories in my Legends of the Northern Paiute had titles, but I was encouraged by Oregon State University to give them titles. It was hard for me to give a title to a legend because I wasn't taught that. It was just taught. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think a part of what many of our younger people that have higher education than I do are calling that type of a process that started back in the 1800s colonization. That wasn't our way, our tribal way. It was a way that was introduced to us that we're starting to incorporate in naming our songs and naming our stories and things that was foreign to us. And I would probably bet my bottom dollar that when Safer collected those stories, they probably had no titles to them. He gave them titles based on the context of the story. And I think, if I'm correct, the Nez Perce text that was written by a Nez Perce tribal member that was college educated and went on to teach in Russia, or Chifini. I think he says that in the foreword of his book, that of the Nez Perce text, that most of the stories never had titles, and that he put titles on them in order to separate them from other stories among the Nez Perce people. I hope that answers your question.
And it certainly, as a much younger individual than Fred and Wilson, I think for me, I'm 41 years old. I used to run the Recreation and Youth Services program for a tribe, and we would do the telephone game, right? We would all sit in a circle, and I would tell them one thing, and by the end, after 30, 40, 50 kids, it was completely different. I mean, just crazy, just like, whoa, where did that come from? So when I hear stories growing up, and then I go to other reservations or hear stories from friends or families from other places, they're very similar, maybe a little bit of differences. So to me, that's very indicative that the stories didn't pass more than 1, 2, 3 individuals on to. So the similarities in that is very reflective of the telephone game. So if it was passed on more than 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'm not talking generations, it's probably how it just happened. You know what I mean? So when I hear elders talk about being related and that we're all connected, those are the kind of reflections that I see, that Coyote represented something that was more than in a tribe, but it was bigger than each tribe, and it's a universal kind of story wherever we go. You know what I mean? So that's the way I take it, and I can't speak for others up here, but as a younger individual, that's kind of what I used to totally get jealous. By the way, when I'd read Coyote stories from some other place, I said, "That's what Grandma was telling me." You know what I mean? And it's just kind of something that you learn to deal with, and understanding that, man, we are all connected and we are all related because our stories are very similar. You know what I mean? So.
I think what comes to mind is any time that our elders, when they would talk, because they would be reflecting of what they had known and heard. And so when they would begin, many times you'd hear, Mimi, Anakui Wacha, long ago how it was. And then he would begin that oration. When I was still a little baby, maybe they begin that way to tell the stories. And then my wife here, can also reiterate, especially of landmarks of when she was with her pusha, her paternal grandfather. Because of what the land is and has always been to us, and what it was before settlement, and where this one place in particular, I think she is able to talk about that, that where now that land, piece of land, has been dug into for the rock company, and where it is, it's pretty much still there, but it's been dug into, and then when you look at the coloration of the rock, it's the blood of that animal that was there. That is it the beaver? Two beavers.
It's a rock quarry now.
Yeah. So that Tunpo Nisha Wishbush. Yeah. So Wishbush Yai. What they were at one time, and so. Yeah, that's. But again, I'm sure that she had the same, Mimi Anakuiwacha. And so that, I believe that Virginia Beaver has printed her second edition of Anakuiwacha. And so that is available, I believe, through the, just Google that word, Anakuiwacha, 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 the way it was. Thank you.
I've got just another little perspective on this, and it kind of also has to do with coyote. Siyasho Tititnine, we're also known as the coyote people, and we're known as the coyote people, whereas my grandfather would say Spieli, if you'd say it way cooler than that. We were known as coyote people because literally coyote lived with us in physical form in our village, in our land, spreading mischief, giving us all kinds of great stories. And I mean, everybody here on this dais has probably got more coyote stories than you could shake a stick at. That's another tradition. I won't get into that. Now, an interesting story that Wilson told about the Great Basin and coyote falling from the Star People. I'd never heard that story before, but it really started setting off, the gerbil was really going full speed in my brain. And there's another story about Coyote. He's really in love with those star women up there. They must be really, really beautiful, really pretty up there. Because if he went up there after the Great Basin, then he came to us and he said, I'm going to try it again. So I'm going to go up there, and this time Moon came down. Moon's a big man, and he's got all these star wives. They're all beautiful. He came down along the horizon with all of his star wives. And Coyote went up way high on the mountain in the center of our world. He grabbed the shawl of one of the star women and he rode it all the way up from the sky. Now Creator made it so that would happen. And it happened simultaneously as Creator was subduing Lao, the headman of the underworld, at his lodge, which was Mount Mazama, now Crater Lake. But it didn't become Creator Lake until Coyote had a little bit of a fallout with one of these star women. Smacked down and went all the way down to earth. And just when Creator, Quaempts, is having a little trouble with Lao, who's an equal spirit in terms of earthly power, you might say, there comes Coyote screaming down out of the sky, another shooting star. Hits the mountain, craters in Crater Lake. And there's the head man of the underworld underneath that mountain, sealed away for all time. And because Coyote was being a jerk and being rude and all the things that he did, and these behaviors that we're not supposed to emulate, we're supposed to learn from. And so for me, it's kind of a perspective, personal perspective. I hear all the other stories, and it's not like, oh, I'm hearing a story of this valley and this basin, though I do connect that in my mind because that is a value. You need to know where these stories come from. I'm hearing, boy, Coyote, he took off from our village and he went over there and he caused trouble, and he went over here and he caused trouble. It's the same character for me. It's not multiple coyotes. So, thank you.
I was raised, Coyote is a trickster. He could also be a medicine man or, but mostly a trickster. I grew up in Coos Bay, but then we moved to up near Seattle, Washington, and the story of the Dark Lady was also known as Pichpilcus, or the Crying Woman down in Mexico. Zunaqua up in the Canada area. So stories, even just that little move in the 80s for me was, wow, how did they know about the Dark Lady? Is what we call her, or Pichpilcus. And then for as far as like the story that Aiyanna told about the snake, I've heard 3 versions of that story just here in the Pacific Northwest. So stories like they were saying, it can just be passed down from person to person, the telephone game, things like that. But you know, there's stories that, you know, I was, how do you know that's true? How do you know that really happened? My mom would say, that's because my grandmother told me it was true. And then she'd say, well, how did she know? And she'd say, oh, because her grandmother said it was true. I mean, we could go back a million years to that, but I've heard, like I said, the same story many different ways from many different tribes, all the way, like I said, from Canada all the way down to Mexico. So.
All right, do we have another question with potentially 5 or 6 answers? Here we are.
Hello. First of all, I'd like to thank the people, Matt and what's the name? Molly, for this occasion, because it's not often that you hear people, the original people from Oregon. We don't have this privilege often of hearing your true stories, and it's really an honor to hear them, and I thank you for them. I wanted to ask the artists of the painting and watercolors, and it seems when I look at those paintings, especially yours, Justin, I see layers of paint that I hadn't noticed before, and so I'm thinking that there must be layers of meaning that you've inserted there, and I'm wondering if you can talk to 1 or 2 of your paintings in that respect, if we can pull them.
Yeah, Molly, can you put the paintings back up? Yeah, so I have a broadcast journalism degree from Oklahoma State, and to be honest, that program is a top 20 broadcast program in America, and it was truly rigorous. I mean, we would go to Texas A&M, leave on a Thursday, get home Monday morning at like 4 in the morning, and I'd have to go to lab, Monday at 8. Reporting was no joke, so I learned how to write, and a lot of people, I've had articles published and poems published, and people ask me, well, how do you write? You know what I mean? And I don't really have an answer, other than I get in this mode, and it's very similar to like when I was pitching. So I'm relaying now things that I learned from my dad in regards to high pressure situations. And when I'm in front of a canvas and I'm spraying, it's very similar to when I'm writing, and it's very similar to when I was pitching. I just get in this framework and just this mode and this energy of just like pure, unadulterated like bliss, where I'm just like in just this nirvana of like just time's really slow. I mean, I could be down there all night, and I get a text from my daughter, and it's like, you've been down there for like 8 hours. I didn't even realize it. So for me, it's very similar to writing. So I come piece by piece, understanding my broader picture, but more importantly, I'm really organic. I'm really just by the flow, and with this, things start coming and folding and just unveiling themselves to me in a way that I see it, and I guess the confidence that I started gaining with my projects started developing this sense of understanding of what other people might view as something that was pretty good as well. But a lot of my stuff's abstract. So if you can look at this one, if you flip it this way, you can see the sky with the blue, and if you flip it the other way, it's a sunset. You know what I mean? So a lot of my paintings, you can rotate 3-4 different ways, and you still see something. You know what I mean? So when I'm going and I'm flowing, I'm just painting, and yes, there are so many layers upon layers that I mean, there are times when it looks amazing and I'm just like, oh man, I go upstairs, I get dinner, and then I come back down and I'm like, that's a little bit off. Like, and it's not even much at all, you know what I mean? And then it morphs into a whole new project. So this for me, art is therapy. After back surgery, my surgeon literally moved from Walla Walla to Portland. No conversation, no context, nothing. No physical therapy, I was on my own. This was my physical therapy. So for me, it was a part of not only the natural healing process that my back endured, but more importantly, the spirit, because my spirit was broke, guys. Like literally was broke. I had to resign from the board of trustees because I physically couldn't go to work anymore. Couldn't sit, couldn't walk, couldn't do anything. And that was all day, every day. And this is what got me out of it. This is what got my peace of mind, my soul, and it got me back into balance. So to me, my writing is one thing, my poems is another, but this is the easiest and best way for me to communicate now, is through my art. So I hope that helps.
Okay, I think we have time for one more. Today? Okay, front row.
I just want to thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for your songs and your stories and your presence. It's an honor to be here and to be with you. I was raised here. I grew up in Walla Walla. I'm from this land, and I love it so much. And my question, I think, is how can I express that to the land itself? What would you say would be the best way that I can continue to give back?
You got $1 million?
I was thinking more like prayer.
That's an interesting question, and it's one that I hear often. I hear it across the coast from, DePoe Bay, where I live now, all the way down south to Curry County, North California. It's a question that a lot of good-hearted people have. I don't know that there's one answer for you. I think listening to Indigenous people, listening to our stories, listening to our spirituality, learning how to live with that respectfully is a big step, number one. Because even if you're already a respectful person, not to put a pall in the evening or anything, we live in a world that quite frankly doesn't respect nor love nor want to see our Indigenous ways upheld or last. So we are working against the clock. We're working against systemic pressures that clearly are greater than us, yet somehow we're still here. So I think you're doing a good job already. Anybody want to take a step?
Thank you. So I come from a third generation of board of trustees. My grandpa was actually the first chairman for our tribe and was a part of the transition from the traditional chieftainship to the formal government that we now have. My dad was a 12-year board of trustees member as well. And when we were talking about blood quantum and those type of things, because that was the context and the situation I grew up with my grandfather. And Fred knows Atwai Quaempts, Elias. And when talking about those type of things, and he would always refer to that's paper, that's on paper, but if you have the thoughts, feelings, and the insight, like you're referring to now, he would tell you, you got this much in you, I can feel it. And you're Totokan, just by the way you're speaking, your energy. And that's the way I talk about it today, you know what I mean? Just hearing you talk about it like that is a step forward. But just over here, we're talking, there's things that are going on in each one of our school districts, each initiative through our kids that we're trying to implement that need support, that need op-ed letters in the local papers, that, historical context, come to our reservation, come to Mustelek, do those type of things. Reach out to the tribes. Do everything that you can to learn the histories, you know what I mean? If that means coming over and doing certain things during cultural events that is open to the public, come over, you know what I mean? Those are the type of opportunities that are going to allow you to understand where we're coming from easier, so you can reflect that through your relationships away from Native culture and people. So.
Thank you, everybody. And again, thanks for sticking around for the end here. Once more, a round of applause. I mentioned Shannin and Aiyanna brought copies of the Kalapuya Dictionary if you want to take a peek and have a look. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Real quick before we stop, we went ahead and made a card for you, and on behalf of Esther Stutzman and me, and us, we would like to donate a set of dictionaries to you and your, I can't lift it up with one hand, to you and for you to use here at the college.
Thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
Oh my goodness.